Welcome. Tonight's story is about Fernando Redondo, a tall, elegant midfielder from Argentina, a player who seemed to slow the game down whenever the ball reached his feet. Fans at Real Madrid still remember the calm way he controlled matches, the long blonde hair, the quiet authority in midfield, and the unforgettable nights of the Champions League. But this story does not begin in the great stadiums of Europe. It begins far away, in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Now you can rest. There is nothing you need to do tonight. Just listen. Let that be enough to begin. A name, a city, and the beginning of a long and quiet journey. Buenos Aires is one of the largest cities in South America. It sits on the southern bank of the Rio de la Plata, the wide estuary that separates Argentina from Uruguay. The city is vast, spread across dozens of neighborhoods, each with its own character. It is a city of wide avenues and narrow side streets, of parks and plazas where people gather in the evening, of noise and conversation that continues long after dark. Fernando Carlos Redondo was born on June 6, 1969, in the Adrogué neighborhood, in the southern part of the greater Buenos Aires area. Adrogué is a quieter district than the city center, more residential, with tree-lined streets and a pace that is somewhat removed from the intensity of central Buenos Aires. It is the kind of neighborhood where children played football in the streets and on the open patches of ground between buildings, where the game was part of the daily texture of life, rather than something that required a special trip or a formal arrangement. Football in Argentina in the 1970s was everywhere. It was on the radio and on television. It was in the conversations of adults and in the games of children. The 1978 World Cup, hosted by Argentina, would have been part of the atmosphere of Redondo's early childhood, a national event of enormous significance, the tournament arriving into the city and the country at a time when he was 9 years old. Growing up in Buenos Aires with football as a constant background meant that the game was absorbed naturally, without formal instruction in the early years. Children learned by playing, by imitating what they saw, by spending hours with a ball on whatever surface was available. The quality of the surface did not matter. The size of the space did not matter. The ball and the other players were enough. Redondo was tall for a footballer, particularly for a midfielder. He would grow to around 180 centimeters, which in Argentine football at the time made him physically distinctive in his position. But his game was never built around his physical presence in the way that height might suggest. He played with his technical ability, with his touch and his awareness, with a capacity for reading the game that was already present in his youth and would deepen throughout his career. The Buenos Aires football environment in the late 1970s and early 1980s offered a young player with talent a clear pathway. Local clubs, youth academies, the possibility of being noticed and brought into a professional structure. Argentine football at the club level was competitive and deeply organized around this pipeline, from youth football to the professional game. Redondo came to the attention of Argentinos Juniors, a club from the La Paternal neighborhood of Buenos Aires. Argentinos Juniors had a history that was already notable by the time Redondo arrived in their system. The club had produced Diego Maradona, who had come through their youth academy in the 1970s, before becoming the most famous footballer in the world. The academy at Argentinos Juniors had a reputation for developing technically gifted players, for valuing skill and intelligence over size and power. For a young player with Redondo's profile, technically capable and thoughtful in the way he approached the game, Argentinos Juniors was a fitting environment. The club's philosophy matched the qualities he was developing. The training grounds at a Buenos Aires football club in the early 1980s had a particular feel. Early morning sessions with the light still low and the grass carrying the moisture of the night. The sound of players moving through drills. The rhythm of passing exercises. The quiet instructions of coaches observing from the side. This was the world Redondo entered as a young player working through the youth categories of Argentina's juniors. Youth football development at this level was serious work. There were many talented players in the system, and the competition for places was real. Moving from the youth categories into the reserve team, and eventually into the first team squad, required consistent performance over an extended period. Natural ability was necessary, but not sufficient. The ability to apply that ability day after day, in training and in competitive matches, was what separated the players who made it from the players who did not. Redondo made his professional debut for Argentinos juniors in the late 1980s. He was a teenager moving into the first team environment of a serious Argentine club. The domestic league in Argentina was organized around the short championship format, the Apertura and Clausura, each lasting around 19 rounds. The intensity of Argentine football at this level was significant. Every match carried weight. The supporters were engaged and vocal. The physical and tactical demands were real and immediate. His early appearances for Argentinos juniors showed the qualities that would define his entire career. He received the ball confidently. He distributed it cleanly. He read the spaces around him and positioned himself well. He was not a flashy player in the sense of individual dribbling runs or acrobatic moments. He was effective in a quieter way, making the team function more smoothly through the simple and consistent quality of what he did. Argentine football in the late 1980s was watching a generation of players develop who would go on to have significant careers in Europe. The flow of Argentine talent to Spain, Italy, and other European leagues was well established by this period. Clubs in Europe were aware of the pipeline of technically gifted players that Argentine football produced, and scouts and agents moved between Buenos Aires and European capitals with regularity. Redondo's performances for Argentinos juniors attracted attention. He was not the most celebrated young player in Argentine football at that moment, but he was clearly someone with the qualities that European football valued: technically reliable, positionally intelligent, composed under pressure. The move to Spain came in the early 1990s. Redondo joined Club Deportivo Tenerife, based on the island of Tenerife in the Canary Islands. Tenerife was not one of the major Spanish clubs. They were not competing for La Liga titles or in the Champions League, but the club had been performing well in the Spanish top flight during this period, and they were a stable and serious professional environment. The Canary Islands have a climate and a pace of life that are different from mainland Spain. The islands sit in the Atlantic Ocean off the northwestern coast of Africa, and their weather is mild and steady throughout the year. The training environment at Tenerife, set against the landscape of the island, was calm in a way that the intensity of Buenos Aires had not been. For Redondo, arriving in Spain represented a significant adjustment on multiple levels. A new country, a new language in its formal professional context, a new league, new teammates and coaches. But the core of what he did, receiving and distributing the ball, reading the game, positioning himself correctly, was the same, regardless of where he was playing. His time at Tenerife was a period of adaptation and development. He played regularly in La Liga, which was one of the strongest leagues in the world. The opponents he faced every week were of a consistently high quality. The tactical demands of Spanish football, with its emphasis on positional organization and technical quality, suited the way Redondo played. He was not asked to do things he was not good at. He was asked to do the things he did well and to do them reliably in a competitive and demanding environment. Tenerife, during the early 1990s, were a mid-table club in La Liga, but they were a club that had caused some notable results against the larger clubs. Their environment gave Redondo regular professional football at the top level of Spanish competition and the experience of operating in a well-organized coaching structure. Over his seasons at Tenerife, Redondo's reputation in Spanish football grew. He was not yet a widely famous name outside of Argentina and Spain, but within football circles, he was becoming recognized as a midfield player of real quality. His ability to control the tempo of a game from deep, to win the ball and then use it cleanly, to make the right decision under pressure, was becoming more consistently visible. The Spanish football environment of the early 1990s was one of the most technically demanding in the world. Barcelona, under Johan Cruyff, were playing a style of football that was influencing the entire European game. Real Madrid were assembling strong squads. The competition across La Liga was genuine and deep. Playing in this environment week after week sharpened Redondo's game. The Spanish league did not allow for easy matches or days when concentration could drift. The quality of opposition was too consistent for that. But rather than wearing him down, this level of challenge seemed to clarify and strengthen what he did. His game settled into a reliable pattern, and that reliability began to attract attention from the clubs operating at the very top of Spanish football. Real Madrid's interest in Redondo developed during his time at Tenerife. The club recognized in him the qualities they needed in their midfield. A player who could protect the defense, who could receive the ball under pressure and not lose it, who could help build play from deep with clean and intelligent passing. These were qualities that Real Madrid valued in their midfielders, and Redondo had demonstrated them consistently in La Liga. The transfer to Real Madrid came in 1994. Redondo was 25 years old. He was moving from a modest club on an Atlantic island to one of the most celebrated clubs in the history of football. The Estadio Santiago Bernabéu, Real Madrid's home ground in the northern part of Madrid, was one of the great football venues in the world. It held over 70,000 spectators and had witnessed some of the most significant moments in the history of the European game. Madrid, as a city, was different from Tenerife in almost every way. Larger, faster, more intense, set in the middle of the Castilian plateau at an altitude that gives the city a particular quality of light and air. Winters in Madrid are cold and clear. Summers are hot and dry. The city never stops completely, but it has its own rhythms and its own geography, and a player arriving there from the quiet of the Canary Islands would have felt the difference immediately. Real Madrid in 1994 were a club with enormous history, but also a club in the middle of an evolving period. They were not yet the team that would dominate the Champions League later in the decade, but the pieces were being assembled. Players and coaches were arriving with the intention of building something that could compete at the highest European level. Redondo's arrival at Real Madrid brought him into a squad and an environment that was on the edge of something significant. Over the next several years, under coach Fabio Capello and then Jupp Heynckes, Real Madrid would build toward major success in European competition. His role in the team was clear. He operated as a holding midfielder, the player positioned in front of the defensive line, whose primary responsibilities were to protect the back four, to win possession when the opposition had the ball, and to begin the build-up play with clean and accurate distribution. In the language of modern football, this position has various names. In the early to mid-1990s, it was simply understood as the engine room of the midfield, the player who made everything else work by doing his job quietly and consistently. Redondo was exceptionally well suited to this role. His physical presence in the midfield was useful, His ability to read the movement of opponents and anticipate where the ball was going allowed him to intercept passes and win possession without always needing to make forceful challenges. When he did need to challenge, he was technically sound, but he preferred to be in the right position before the challenge was needed. In possession, his quality was evident. He was comfortable on the ball under pressure. His first touch was reliable, and his passing was clean. He could find a teammate in a tight space or switch the ball across the pitch with accuracy. He did not rush. One of the things that made Redondo distinctive was his calmness in moments when other players might hurry. He took the time that was available, even when it felt like no time was available, and he used it well. The Santiago Bernabeu under floodlights on European nights had an atmosphere that was specific to that ground and that era. The crowd was large and engaged, knowledgeable about football and demanding of quality. Playing at that level, in those matches, required not just technical ability, but a particular kind of psychological stability. The pressure was real. The scrutiny was constant. Redondo appeared comfortable in that environment. His demeanor on the pitch was consistent regardless of the occasion. He did not appear more anxious in a Champions League match than in a mid-table La Liga fixture. The composure was genuine rather than performed. It was simply the way he played. A steadiness that came from deep familiarity with the game and with his own abilities. His years at Real Madrid built gradually toward the club's most significant achievements in European competition. The 1997-98 season was the first major peak. Under Jupp Heynckes, Real Madrid won the UEFA Champions League, defeating Juventus in the final in Amsterdam. It was the club's first European Cup since 1966, ending a 32-year wait. Redondo was part of that squad, contributing across the season in his role in midfield. The achievement resonated across the football world. Real Madrid returning to the top of European competition after such a long absence was a significant moment in the history of the game. The club, the players, and the coaching staff had produced a campaign of sufficient quality to win the most prestigious club competition in European football. The 1999 to 2000 season brought another Champions League title for Real Madrid, this time under Vicente del Bosque. This campaign included one of the most documented individual moments of Redondo's career, an incident from the quarter-final second leg against Manchester United at Old Trafford that became widely known and is still referenced in discussions of technically gifted midfielders. Real Madrid were losing in that match and needed a goal. In the second half, Redondo received the ball near the byline and, facing a defender blocking his path, used a back heel to deflect the ball behind the defender and into the space he then ran into, allowing him to deliver a cross into the penalty area. The goal that followed helped Real Madrid through to the next round. The action itself was a piece of technical skill under pressure, precisely executed at an important moment in a significant match. It was the kind of moment that tends to define how a player is remembered in highlight footage, a single action that captured something essential about their qualities. Redondo had been doing things of this kind throughout his career, making good decisions in tight situations, using his technical ability to create what force could not. This particular moment happened to occur on a large stage and was filmed clearly, and so it became the most replayed representation of the quality he had been showing for years. Real Madrid went on to win the Champions League that season, defeating Valencia in the final in Paris. It was Redondo's second Champions League title with the club. He had been a consistent presence across the campaign, contributing in the way he always had, quietly and effectively, making the team function well without requiring attention for himself. The Argentina national team was another dimension of Redondo's career, though one that was marked by the complexities that often affect players of his profile. He represented Argentina across a period that included significant international tournaments, and he was considered one of the important players in the national team's midfield during those years. Argentina in the 1990s were a consistently strong international side. The generation that included Redondo also included Gabriel Batistuta, Ariel Ortega, Claudio Lopez, and others, a group of players who were among the best in the world in their positions. The national team competed seriously in every major tournament, and the expectations attached to Argentina's performances at the World Cup were always significant. Redondo participated in Argentina's World Cup campaigns during this era. The 1994 World Cup in the United States included Argentina going deep into the tournament before elimination. The 1998 World Cup in France saw Argentina reach the quarter-finals before losing to the Netherlands. These were serious campaigns with a talented squad, though the ultimate prize remained out of reach. His role in the national team was the same as his role at club level. He operated in the midfield, protecting the defense, building play, using the ball with intelligence and care. In the context of an Argentina squad with significant attacking talent, having a reliable and composed player in the defensive midfield role was important to how the team functioned. There is a calm to the life of a professional footballer that is not always visible from outside. The daily routine of training, the early mornings, the physical conditioning work, the tactical sessions, the video analysis, the recovery days. This rhythm continues week after week, month after month, across a career that might span 15 or 20 years. It is not glamorous in most of its details. It is repetitive and demanding, and ordinary, in the way that all sustained professional work is ordinary. Redondo had lived this rhythm across his time at Argentinos Juniors, at Tenerife, and now across many seasons at Real Madrid. The Bernabeu and the Champions League were the visible surface. The daily work underneath was what made those things possible. By the end of his time at Real Madrid, Redondo had established himself as one of the defining figures of the club's most successful European era. He had won 2 Champions League titles. He had been part of La Liga campaigns across several seasons. He had played hundreds of matches for the club at the highest level of European competition. The next move in his career took him to AC Milan. The transfer was a significant one, connecting 2 of the great clubs in European football history. Milan had their own tradition of winning at the highest level, their own history of major players and important moments. They were a club that valued the kind of player Redondo was, technically accomplished and positionally intelligent. Milan is a different city from Madrid, northern Italian, industrial in its history, fashion-focused, wealthy in a way that is expressed in the detail and quality of things rather than in ostentation. The city sits in the Po Valley, flat and often misty in the winter months, hot and humid in the summer. The light there is softer than in Madrid, particularly in autumn and winter, when fog can settle over the city for days at a time. The San Siro, the stadium shared by AC Milan and Inter Milan in the western part of the city, is one of the great football grounds in Europe. Its architecture is distinctive, with the circular towers that hold the upper tiers visible from a distance. On match nights, it creates an atmosphere that is different from the Bernabeu, more enclosed, the sound building differently in the circular structure. Redondo's move to Milan was intended to add his qualities to a club looking to compete again at the highest level. But the transfer was followed almost immediately by serious injury. Before he had been able to establish himself in the Milan squad, before he had played the matches that would have allowed him to settle into the club's rhythms, his knee gave way. The injury was significant. A cruciate ligament rupture, the kind of injury that requires surgery and then a long and careful rehabilitation process. The rehabilitation from a serious knee injury in professional football is one of the longest and most demanding processes in sport. The physical recovery alone takes many months. The ligament must heal, and then the surrounding muscles must be rebuilt and strengthened, and then the player must gradually reintroduce movement, and then training, and then eventually competitive football. At each stage, there is the possibility of setback, of something not healing as expected, of the timeline extending further. For Redondo, the injury at Milan marked the beginning of a period that would extend for years. He spent long periods away from football, working through rehabilitation, returning to training, suffering further setbacks, working through rehabilitation again. The career that had been moving forward so consistently, from Adrogué to Argentinos Juniors, to Tenerife, to Real Madrid, and the peak of European club football, had been interrupted at its very next step. This kind of experience tests a professional footballer in ways that competition does not. On the pitch, the challenges are external. Opponents, the pace of the game, the pressure of important matches. Off the pitch, in rehabilitation, the challenge is internal. The patience required to work through months of recovery when you want to be playing. The uncertainty about whether the body will return to full function. The distance from the daily rhythms of a squad and a training environment that have defined your working life for years. Redondo worked through this period. The details of each setback and each return are part of the medical record of his career, rather than the public story. But the overall shape of those years at Milan was one of significant struggle to return to professional football after a career-threatening injury. There is something worth pausing on here. The period of serious injury, the long absence from competitive football, arrived at a moment when Redondo had just achieved the highest things available in European club football. 2 Champions League titles, hundreds of matches for one of the great clubs, a reputation as one of the best midfielders of his generation. And then, almost immediately after moving to the next chapter, all of it interrupted by something beyond his control. Football careers contain this kind of interruption with some regularity. Players who have given years to the game find that the game sometimes takes back those years in the form of injury and absence. It is not proportional. It does not reflect the work that has been put in or the quality that has been shown. It is simply one of the realities of professional sport. What players do in those periods, how they approach the work of recovery, how they maintain their relationship with the game while unable to play it, says something about them. Redondo continued working. He did not walk away from football while there was still a possibility of returning. He stayed at the club, stayed in the rehabilitation process, kept moving toward the possibility of playing again. His eventual return to competitive football at Milan was limited by the long absence and the age at which he was now operating. He had been in his early 30s when the injury occurred, and the years of rehabilitation meant that by the time he was able to play again, the window for sustained top-level competition was narrow. He made appearances for Milan, but not the extended run of consistent matches that a return to full fitness at an earlier age might have allowed. The final years of his playing career were shaped by this reality. He was no longer the Redondo of the Real Madrid years, not because the ability had fundamentally changed, but because the body had been through too much, and the time available was too short. He managed what he could, and played when he could, but the career was drawing toward its natural conclusion. He retired from professional football in 2004. He was 34 years old. The career had begun in Buenos Aires in the late 1980s and had taken him through Spain and the highest levels of European club football before ending in Italy. It was a career that included genuine peak achievement, 2 Champions League titles, years of consistent performance at Real Madrid, recognition as one of the defining midfielders of his era, interrupted but not ultimately diminished by the injury period that followed. Think for a moment about what remained after the playing stopped. The technical knowledge accumulated across nearly 2 decades of professional football, the understanding of how midfield play works, of what it means to control the pace of a game from deep, of how to position yourself to intercept the opponent's intentions before they become actions. This kind of knowledge does not disappear when the playing stops. Redondo's life after football became a quieter one in public terms. He did not move immediately into high-profile coaching or punditry. He was not a regular presence in the football media in the way that some former players become. He stepped back from the immediate world of the professional game. This is consistent with the kind of person that his career suggested he was. Redondo had never been a player who sought the center of attention. He had done his work in the midfield with consistent quality, and his best performances had often been ones that supporters and journalists noticed primarily through their effects rather than through obvious individual moments. A career built on that kind of substance does not necessarily produce a person who wants to remain in the spotlight once the playing is done. He returned to Argentina eventually, back to the country where he had grown up, where his football had first formed. Buenos Aires was the city where he had been born, and where Argentinos juniors had first developed him as a professional player. Returning there, after the European years and the injury period and the gradual conclusion of the playing career, was a return to something fundamental. Buenos Aires continues to be a city that lives through football. The clubs are still there, still producing players, still sending them to Europe, still competing in the Argentine league, with the intensity that has always been present in the game there. The neighborhoods where children play football in the streets have new children playing in them. The cycle continues without pause. Redondo has been involved in football in Argentina in various capacities since his retirement, though he has not sought the public profile that some former players maintain through media or coaching at major clubs. His presence in Argentine football has been quieter, more in the background of the game's infrastructure than at its visible surface. The legacy of a player like Redondo is not easily measured in the conventional terms that football statistics provide. He did not score many goals. He was not an attacking player whose contributions appeared clearly in the final third. The work he did was of a different kind, felt most clearly by the players around him and by coaches who understood what his presence in the midfield provided. But there are ways to measure influence beyond statistics. The 2 Champions League titles with Real Madrid are part of the permanent record, the recognition from contemporaries, players who played against him or alongside him, coaches who depended on his qualities, is consistent and meaningful. And then there is the broader impression that serious observers of the game carry from watching him play, of a midfielder who understood his role completely and fulfilled it with a level of technical quality that was genuinely rare. In discussions of the best defensive midfielders of the 1990s and early 2000s, Redondo's name appears regularly. The comparisons that are drawn, the qualities that are cited, consistently return to the same elements: the composure on the ball, the reading of the game, the ability to win possession without unnecessary aggression, the clean and intelligent distribution that followed. These are not small things. They are the specific qualities that determine whether a midfield functions well or functions poorly, whether a team can build its play from a stable base, or whether it is constantly disrupted and forced backward. Redondo provided that stability across many years, at a level where stability of that kind was hardest to maintain. There is a detail from the broader context of Argentine football that adds a layer to understanding Redondo's place in the game. He played in the same national team as players of the caliber of Batistuta, in a squad that had significant attacking quality and that was consistently competitive in international football during the 1990s. The fact that he was considered a central figure in that team, not despite his quiet role, but because of it, reflects something important about how football actually works when it is working well. Teams need players who make other players better. They need players who create the conditions for attacking talent to express itself, who provide the ball reliably, and who protect the team when it does not have possession. In Argentina's national team during those years, Redondo was that player. His presence in the midfield allowed other players to do what they did best, because the fundamental work of the position was being handled with consistent quality. The soft sounds of a Buenos Aires evening, the distant noise of the city, always present, but not intrusive. The particular quality of light in a South American city at dusk, warm and slightly orange. The sky still holding colour after the sun has gone. A child with a football, somewhere, on a quiet street. The sound of the ball being kicked against a wall and returning. A simple and repeated rhythm. That is where this story began. In Adrogué, in the southern part of Greater Buenos Aires, in a neighborhood with tree-lined streets and the ordinary textures of Argentine urban life, a boy who would become one of the most technically refined midfielders of his generation grew up somewhere in that environment, learning the game the way all Argentine players of that era learned it, through constant exposure and constant play. The distance from that beginning to the Santiago Bernabeu on a Champions League night is enormous, measured in years and experience and the accumulated work of a professional career. But the essential qualities were probably already present in the beginning, in the way the boy received the ball and distributed it, in the awareness he showed of the space around him, in the calmness with which he made decisions. Professional football develops and refines these qualities. It does not create them. The years at Argentinos Juniors, and then Tenerife, and then Real Madrid, sharpened what was already there. The coaches and teammates and opponents across all of those years contributed to the refinement. But the foundation was laid in Buenos Aires, in the earliest years, before any of the professional structure existed. Fabio Capello, who coached Redondo at Real Madrid, was among those who spoke highly of his qualities. Vicente del Bosque, who managed the team that won the 2000 Champions League, worked with him across that campaign. The players who lined up alongside him in the Real Madrid midfield of the late 1990s understood what he provided to the team, not always in ways that showed up in the statistics, but in the fundamental functioning of the side. This is one of the persistent truths about football. The players who make the deepest difference to a team are not always the ones whose names appear most frequently in the headlines. The work of protecting a defense, of winning the ball back in central areas, of building play with intelligent and accurate passing, happens throughout a match in dozens of small actions that individually attract little attention. Cumulatively, they determine whether a team functions well or functions poorly. Redondo was one of the players of his generation who did this work at the highest possible level. The Champions League campaign of 1999 to 2000, which ended with Real Madrid's 7th European title and included the match at Old Trafford, is remembered as one of the high points of Redondo's career and of Real Madrid's modern history. The squad that year contained significant quality throughout. Players like Raúl, Roberto Carlos, Iker Casillas, Claude Makelele, and others contributed across the campaign. Redondo's role in that squad was part of a collective achievement rather than a solo story. But the specific moment at Old Trafford, the technical action that created the chance that put Real Madrid in a position to progress, became the image most associated with him in the wider football world. When people who are not specialists in the tactical details of the game think of Fernando Redondo, they often think of that moment first. It captured something about his qualities in a single image: the ball, the defender, the space, the decision made in an instant, the precise execution. There is something appropriate about that being the most remembered moment, not because it was the most important thing he did in his career, but because it illustrated the essence of what he was as a player. He used technique to solve problems that force could not solve. He read a situation and found an answer that was not obvious, but was, once he had found it, exactly right. The life of a professional footballer after retirement often moves in unpredictable directions. Some players find that the transition is straightforward, that they move into coaching or management or media work and find a natural place there. Others find the transition harder, the daily structure and purpose of the playing career harder to replace than they had expected. Redondo's post-playing life has been private in most of its details. He has not been a prominent public figure in Argentine or European football in the years since his retirement. He has been present in Argentine football culture without being at its center. This seems consistent with the kind of person the career suggested he was. Purposeful when there was a purpose to be served. Quiet when quiet was appropriate. He has lived in Argentina, connected to his family and to the country where his football life began. The specific details of his daily life are not widely documented, which is appropriate. Not every story needs its ending written in large letters. Some things settle into their natural place without requiring announcement. What remains of a football career, after all the matches have been played and all the training grounds have been left behind, is a kind of presence in the memory of the game. Former players exist in football culture in different ways. Some are constantly referenced in tactical discussions. Some appear regularly in retrospectives on a particular era. Some are remembered by supporters of a specific club with particular warmth. Some influence younger players who watched them and carried something of their style into their own game. Redondo occupies a specific place in the memory of football from the 1990s. He is associated with a particular kind of midfield play, elegant and effective, technically demanding in ways that were not always obvious from a distance. He is associated with the Real Madrid of the late 1990s, with 2 Champions League titles, with a style of club football that was widely admired during that era. And he is associated, in Argentina, with the generation of players who carried the country's football tradition into the European game, who demonstrated in the strongest competitions in the world that the technical qualities developed on Argentine pitches could function at the very highest level. It is quiet now. The story has moved from the streets of Adrogué to the youth academy at Argentinos Juniors, from the training grounds of Tenerife to the Bernabeu and its European nights, from the heights of the Champions League to the difficult years of injury in Milan, and back eventually to Argentina and the quieter life that followed the playing career. That is the whole arc, not dramatic in its telling, because the life itself, while full of real achievement and real difficulty, was lived in the way that most serious professional lives are lived, with consistent work and consistent purpose, without unnecessary noise. Fernando Redondo was a footballer who understood his position deeply and fulfilled its requirements with a level of technical quality that was genuinely rare. He won the highest prizes available in European club football. He represented his country with distinction. He dealt with serious injury without disappearing from the game. He returned to Argentina and settled into a quieter life once the playing was done. That is enough. More than enough, in fact. A career of real quality and real contribution, lived without excess, completed without fanfare. Let the images settle now. The training grounds in the morning, The grass, the ball moving cleanly between players, the Bernabeu at night, the floodlights on, the crowd filling the tiers around the pitch, a midfield player receiving the ball, turning, finding the right pass, moving to receive it again. The simplicity of those actions, repeated across hundreds of matches and thousands of training sessions, is what a football career is made of at its core. The matches that are remembered, the moments that find their way into highlight reels and football conversations decades later, are built on that ordinary and repeated work. Redondo did that work for a long time, in Buenos Aires, and in the Canary Islands, and in Madrid, and in Milan, in the Argentine national team colours, and in the white of Real Madrid, and the red and black of Milan, in youth football, and in the Champions League final. The work was the same. The commitment to doing it well was consistent. Your breathing has slowed. The room is quiet. The night outside is doing what the night does, moving slowly toward morning without any help from you. There is nothing left in this story that needs your full attention. It has found its way to its natural end. A boy in Adrogué with a football. A midfielder at the Bernabeu making a decision in half a second that was exactly right. A career that moved through Argentina and Spain and Italy, and eventually back to Argentina. A life in football, lived carefully and with genuine quality. Let all of that go now. Let it drift. The details do not need to be held. They have done their work, keeping you company through the quiet hours. The night is soft. The darkness is steady. There is nothing it asks of you. Sleep now. Rest well.